Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Revelation study. I'm so glad you decided to tune in with us. We are trekking well into the ending of the great Revelation, the Revelation of John. We started this series probably 10 months ago. 11 months ago, we started this series, and we have been taking our time, tiptoeing through the scripture to see what God is saying to us in this season. We started it closer to the beginning of the pandemic, and now things are loosening and lightening up as those of us are getting shots in arms and starting to return to life as normal. But that doesn't suggest that we are no longer living in a period close to this period. We are absolutely living in a period that is close to those things that God showed to John in the book of Revelation. So last week we were in chapter 20, and in chapter 20 we talked about the millennial reign, the 1,000 years of reign that Jesus Christ would reign with us on the earth, and Satan would be absent. From the beginning of the ticking of time, Satan would be absent, and so it would be a perfect government. It would be a perfect system. Perfect worship, pure worship would be taking place on earth, kind of what God had intended when he designed Eden. But it would be 1,000 years to decipher, would men choose God if Satan came back after the 1,000 years? And those who knew God and loved God and had a heart for God, of course, chose him. But there were some that were born during that period to parents who had been saved and had come out of the tribulation and had been raptured out as part of the church, who indeed would not choose him, would be deceived, as the scripture suggests to us, by Satan, and would be thrown into the lake of fire. So today we're in chapter 21. It is the penultimate chapter of the book of Revelation. It is the second to last chapter, and it's really where a lot of the action, the good stuff, the things that we like to hold dear, the storyline, if you will. It is kind of the ending of the storyline. Now, there's a little bit of storyline in 22, but for the most part, chapter 22 is an epilogue. And so when I originally began studying for this, I assumed that today would be our last session. But under further review, I think next week will probably be our last session. Now, today we're in chapter 21, and what I want you to be aware of, what I want to be on the forefront of your mind, is that we are no longer operating in time. Chronos is no longer a factor. We are now permanently in eternity. We're now permanently in eternity. See, we had been going from period to period, when we talk about dying and being raptured, those of us who are raptured, those of us who died in Christ and have risen at this period, those of us who were witnesses, those who were summoned back to heaven, at some point you transitioned to eternity, but there was still chronos, there was still time going on the earth, okay? Well, at this point, the judgment seat of Christ has already taken place. The church has been raptured a long time ago. God has dealt with sin. Armageddon has taken place. And we are now permanently in eternity. All right? And so we're going to pick up at verse 1 in chapter 21. We're going to do like we always do, and we're going to tiptoe through the scripture. All right, here we go. Chapter 21, verse 1. We find these words. It says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea." I want to begin here, and I want us to keep at the forefront of our mind is that this is not a new concept. This is the first time we see that it says there's a new earth and new heaven, but this is not a new concept. When we venture to Matthew 24, verse 35, we see this concept of a new heaven and a new earth. When we venture over to Isaiah 65, verse 13, we see this new concept of a new heaven and a new earth. When we venture over to Isaiah 16, we see this concept of a new heaven and a new earth. It's been whispered throughout the scripture, and here we are in verse 1, it's being shouted, if that makes sense. It was not concealed, but it was whispered. All right, so it wasn't hidden, but it wasn't a big deal. Here, this is the theme. There is a new heaven and a new earth. It is the theme of the chapter. What I also want you to see that I want us to consider Hebrews 11 quickly. Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verse 13, it says, "And these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. They were persuaded of them and embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they say such things to declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had the opportunity to return to it. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly. Wherefore, God is not ashamed to be their God, for he has prepared for them a city." There is a new place, a place that had been talked about in Hebrews by the saints, a place that they had that had been whispered throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's a new place, a new heaven and a new earth, and in a minute we're going to talk about this new Jerusalem. But there's a whole different system coming about, ruled by the same God. Okay. But I read to you Hebrews 11. I wanted you to see that those of us who are in the new city put our treasure in the new city before we were ever able to get there. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. Those of us who gained the city, those who God counted righteous, knew that the new city was coming and took God at his word, that the new city, the new Jerusalem, the new heaven, the new earth would be better than anything that they had ever done. Now, that's a tough pill to swallow. Why is that tough? That's tough because we know earth. We know in some way or another how to get good things or nice things on earth. Whether you work hard, whether you learn how to play the stock market, or you pray that you strike gold, that we have an idea of how people come to quote unquote wealth on the earth. But what the scripture is suggesting in Hebrews is that in order to inherit the new heaven and the new earth, your treasure can't be on the things of this earth. Now, that's rough when you see a car that looks nice. That's rough when you're looking for a house and you want all the things. It is one of those things that makes you pause and think and say, now wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's a new city, there's a new heaven, there's a new earth, there's a new city. Now what do I do with that? What do I do with that? And so I want us to also see this, because there's a worldview that counteracts what's taking place. This idea that everything that we know today is going to pass away. There's a worldview that counteracts that. And the Bible actually talks about it in 2 Peter chapter 3. We find this, and around verse 3 it says, "Knowing that this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water in the water, whereby the world that was then, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment, and perdition against ungodly men. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 days, as 1,000 years, as one day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as men count slackness, but in long suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat, and the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Seeing that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought yet ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat? Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. So the worldview that I was talking about, the worldview is that men say the world has gone on from days after day after day, that it keeps on spinning, the sun keeps on shining, the seasons know when to change, although they don't in Alabama. The seasons know when to change, and as men have been talking about, we're in the last days, and the last days never seem to come. That's the worldview. And it's really easy to fall into such a view when things have been going as they have been going. Even though things seem to get worse, they seem to be improving. And so this idea that there's a new heaven and a new earth, or there's a heaven and there's a new Jerusalem coming, seems like it is fairy tale. It would suggest to men that it's fairy tale. That's not how God would operate, if they believe in God, that's the view that they would take. Okay, so there's a view that is counteracted by this idea, but God is not slack. That's what the verse says, right? That's what the chapter says. God is not slack concerning his promises. And the same way that I'm sure men did not believe that God would destroy the heaven, would destroy the earth the way that he did when it rained, the same way that those who's crucified Christ didn't expect the earth to shake and the sky to go black, and the same way that people did not expect to be able to do you name it, I'm sure we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth. All right. Another idea that comes up in this verse is that there is no more sea. No more sea. Now, this idea that there is no more sea is a interesting concept, because this idea that there's no more sea it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it's interesting because some believe that the earth is no longer going to need its cleansing power. It's not going to need its cleansing power. You think about it. The salinity, the saline, the salt in the ocean has cleansing power. I've made numbers of car talks and videos talking about how when I go to the beach, my skin would clear up. Face could be falling half off, could be swollen, but if I got into some salt water, how much money I have spent on sea salts just to get some cleansing power to happen in my skin. And so this idea that the cleansing power, the cleansing power would no longer be needed because Satan is now permanently bound in Gehenna. He's now permanently in hell, and he's not ruling in hell, but he's in hell for punishment's sake. So this idea that the earth would no longer need its cleansing power is an idea. Now, there's another idea that there's no more sea, because the sea, if you recall, when Jesus was in Gadara, that as he was in Gadara, he rebuked, before he got there, he rebuked the seas because the winds and the waves was tossing. And when he arrives in Gadara off of that same boat ride, when he arrives, what you see is this man who is bound by a legion of demons, thousands of demons. The demons speak up, and when Christ cast them out, he cast them out into some pigs, and the pigs go out into the sea. Okay? And when the pigs go out into the sea, it's thought by many to think that the seas are inherently evil. I don't have an opinion either way. Verse 2. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, this is the new Jerusalem. I think I've said this before, but I want to make sure that we understand that Jerusalem is basically broken down in the English as Jireh Shalom. Okay, providing peace. Provider, Jireh, Jehovah Jireh. We sing the song. Jireh, providing. Shalom, peace. Providing peace. So Jireh Shalom. So the new place of peace, the new place of rest, if you will, the new place of safety, the new place of peace, the new Jerusalem. So you remember the old Jerusalem, the Jerusalem on the earth, was the headquarters for Jesus' millennial reign. Okay, it was the place, it was the headquarters. He reigned in Jerusalem on the Mount Zion during his reign there on earth for the 1,000 years. The new Jerusalem, in many ways, is still a headquarters, but it's a different location. It's not located on the earth, from what I understand. Now, what I also want you to see now is coming down. The scripture says it's coming down from earth. Let's read the verse again. It says, and John saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So I want you to see this. It's coming down out of heaven. Now, there are two schools of thoughts here. There's a school of thought that says that it's not coming down out of, it's not going to come to earth. It's going to come and hang right above earth, in between heaven and earth. And then there's another school of thought that says that it comes down to earth and it touches earth. I want to be honest with you. It is my conviction, what I think, what I believe, and I want you to study the scripture down for yourself. What I believe is I think it hangs out above the earth. And I'm going to tell you why, because in a few verses you're going to see that it says that there is no sun because it lights, God is there. And from that New Jerusalem we get light because God is present. And so there's no need for it. And that might just be me looking at the way God did it before and saying, well, the sun is up above the earth and it's in between the heavens. But that's just what I would ascertain. Verse 3. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself shall be with them and be their God. I want you to remember, God, when John writes his gospel in John, when John writes his gospel, remember John is the same writer here. When John writes his gospel, he opens the chapter, the book, the first chapter with the same idea. You know, it talks, what did we just read? What did we just read? And it says, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. Okay, so this whole idea, you remember in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the same was in the beginning with him. It was showing us that God was tabernacled with men. He was covering, he was tied in with men. And so the same idea here presents itself now, yet again, when things begin to be called in order. Now, I kind of like that. I like that. That makes sense to me, because from the beginning of time, God has been trying to be tabernacled with men. From the very beginning, when God designed the heavens and the earth, he designed a place called Eden. And when he designed the place called Eden, he made it beautiful and luscious and full of everything that man would need. The stipulation is that man would listen to him and come talk with him. He made a place where God could talk to man and he could come down and have a meeting place. And when that went awry, he later had a chosen people, and when they came out of a captivity, they built a tabernacle, literally a tabernacle. All right, literally a tabernacle. And then literally in the middle of the camp, a place where men could come and commune with God. Come on. I hope you hear me. And then for a time that was the situation, and the Ark of the Covenant was filled with his glory. And so there was rules about how you went into the tabernacle. There were rules about how you handled the Ark of the Covenant, because it was there that you could encounter God. God wanted to tabernacle with men. He wanted to be among his people. And then when David comes on the throne, David wants to build a temple, but David had too much blood on his hands, and so it was left to his son Solomon. And Solomon builds the temple. When Solomon builds a temple, here we go again, there is a place by which God can come and commune with men, and men could meet him there. If they showed up there and they were in order and they followed the rules, they would have an experience with God. Okay? And then it gets better and better and better. And then, if you'll recall, finally, after generations of silence, tabernacled in flesh, you see Christ come down to walk among men. Then, after he's crucified, died, buried, and he rises again, he sends the Holy Spirit to be tabernacled in men. Any man that would accept it would receive the Holy Spirit so that God could walk with men. All right? And so at every juncture, we get closer and closer to that original desire of God, that he wanted to walk with men. He wanted to walk with you. He wanted to talk with you. He wanted to have relationship with you in and out of time, in and out of time. And when I say in and out of time, like, one of the things about having an intimate relationship with God, I can go back to my days in college. And I would get up and pray at 5, and sometimes it would get sweet to me. And I wouldn't want to come out of his presence. And what I found is that even if I stayed too long in his presence, it seemed like God would slow down time as I got ready for class, and I would still be on time. And so when I make that statement, I'm not quoting what we see here in the scripture, but what he wanted was that men would desire to be in communion with him so bad that he would cause everything else to corral around it. That time would have to obey because we were in communion with God. that finances would have to obey because we were in communion with God. That everything would have to get in line because we had such a heart and a desire to be in communion with God. From the beginning of time, that's what he wanted. And so when we see here in verse 3 that I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. I can only imagine the joy that came over God and the men. So long throughout the generations, men have rejected God, or they've come to God and left God. They've turned aside and changed their mind. But here we are. And men have finally separated the wheat from the tares. And he's finally tabernacled with his people. And not only are the people his, they're glad about it. They're glad about it. Can you imagine the worship in heaven? Can you imagine the worship period? If everybody was on a one accord that we are happy to be in the presence of God, that this isn't a fashion show, this isn't something we just do because we do it, but we are excited about being in your presence, oh God. It's not a chore. It's not something I have to do because I'm supposed to do it, but I am happy about being in your presence. Can you imagine how sweet it must be? How filling it must be. How radiant it must be. Verse 4. And God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. What I've seen is that there are a lot of people who have an issue with God. And one of the biggest reasons people have an issue with God is because they want to know, why did God allow? Why is there so much pain? People grapple with Job because Job wasn't bothering nobody. Job was doing extra things to prevent the things that happened in his life to happen. And we say that the book of Job counteracts the books that are in the Bible before it because we see this theme of if you mess up, you're going to have to pay. You reap and you sow. There was this theme, and then you have Job, and it throws this question in here like, what? So you mean to tell me that I can suffer and I didn't do anything? We see the church at Smyrna. So you mean to tell me I can be doing everything right and my life fall apart? People struggle with God for that reason. And dare I submit to you that the Bible and the book of Job, but both in tandem, are not about suffering. It's not about suffering. It's about gaining a God perspective, because Job was never privy to the conversation that God and Satan had, but we were. We were privy to the conversation to see that God and Satan had a conversation. But all the while, Job is like, what did I do to make you mad? What did I do? Did I make a mistake? I have fasted, and I have put down, I have made offerings for my children just in case they sin on accident. And you mean to tell me my life is falling apart? And so when we hit this verse, and God shall wipe away all the tears from the eyes, and there shall be no more death, no sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. That idea, it sounds marvelous to us. It sounds marvelous to us. It sounds great and reassuring, and even might want to put a little bit of dancing in your feet. But to the person who can't jive with God, it adds a big question mark. It adds a big question mark because it asks the question, why did God allow it in the first place? And I dare submit to you that the question is not, why did God allow, but why did we allow? If you recall at the beginning of time, Adam allows sin into the earth. And when Adam allows sin into the earth, he takes his dominion and he hands it to Satan. And so the God of the earth is not God. God is the God of the universe. There's none more sovereign, none more omniscient, none more omnipotent than him. But he hands his dominion over to Satan. And Satan begins to deceive more men. He begins to cause more chaos. He begins to cause more headache and heartache on the earth. And I say this, and I'm making this pause, and I'm making this conjecture because you've just studied almost the entire book of Revelation. You know what's coming. You know that there is a time that if somebody's not saved, it's not coming. And dare I submit to you that if you beat them over the head by their sin, they'll have this same question that I'm raising. And they're not going to want to hear about the day of no crying and no death and none of this, because they're not going to understand intimacy with God because they're heartbroken. And so my encouragement to you is to explain it that way. Because if we know this information, that there's 7 years of tribulation coming, and there are woe judgments, and there is chaos coming on the earth, and God is going to do what God does, and he's going to pour out judgment and wrath on the earth, and men are going to be deceived, and hearts are going to be hard. I know I got friends that I want saved, and I'm sure you've got family members that you want saved. And so tell somebody. Don't beat them over the head. Tell somebody. Have understanding dialogues, because there is a place. There is a time. There's a time that's coming where God is going to wipe away all the tears. There won't be any more crying. And there will be no more death, no more sorrow. No, there won't be more sorrow, no more crying. There will be no more pain. For that former world system is passed away. Satan is no longer there to torment. There's no more reason to weep. There's no more reason to mourn. There's no more. But I'm going to let this go. But that's all good and well. But I don't want to be there by myself. Tell somebody. Tell somebody. All right, tell somebody. Verse 5. And he sat upon the throne and said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these things are faithful and true. We get a fresh start. We get a fresh start. He says, Behold, I make all things new. He didn't say, Behold, I make some things new. Behold, I'm going to remodel some things. Behold, I'm going to refresh some things. He says, Behold, I make all things new. And not only does he say, Behold, I make all things new, and then he says unto him, he says, For these are the words of the faithful and true. Where do we see that? When we saw that written on the white horse when Jesus comes out of the clouds. Remember that? Remember, we also saw that at the beginning of the book when he says, These are the words of him that are faithful and true. So what do we see? So he says, Behold, I make all things new. Everything is refreshed, but we get the benefit of knowing him from the jump. We get the benefit of the wisdom of knowing him from the jump. We don't have to search and find. There's not a journey to discover self. There's communion forevermore, pleasures forevermore. It doesn't get better than this. It doesn't get better than this. It doesn't get better than this. Verse 6. And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He says unto me, It is done. Now, this is not what's said at the cross. At the cross, he says, It is done, but that is just an English translation for a different word. At the cross, he says, Tetelestai. At the cross, he says, Tetelestai. And y'all know, I know that this is Good Friday, and I'm teaching this on Good Friday, and that is not what you want to hear. When we hear it is done, we get our shout on, we get excited, and all the things, but Tetelestai didn't finish it. We've been teaching that wrong. Tetelestai didn't finish it. Tetelestai paid for it. Tetelestai paid for it, but it didn't finish it. All right, so I deal in investments. That is what I do for a living right now. I deal in investments, both real estate and in financial markets. One of the things about it is whenever I get ready to make an investment, my money has to go from escrow. And all escrow is in a folder. It's a holding folder that says that I have what I say that I have so that I can take receipt of what's coming next. And so the way that it works is that I write a check or I wire some money, and my money goes and it sits in escrow. Okay? And as my money sits in escrow, it only sits there until all the paperwork is complete. And when the paperwork is complete, then I get the keys, or I get the stock, or I get the bond or the option, and my money is taken out of escrow and it's given to the person that I owe. Okay? And because it is given to the person that I owe, it is transferred over to that person. Now, why did I say that? Because when he died on the cross, what happened is he takes the blood. The blood was the payment. It was the payment. And because it was the payment was placed in escrow. And life went on as we knew it. People, children, seed time and harvest went on. Children were still born. People still died. Things still happened. But after he died, the blood was put in escrow. Now, when it says it is done, all that it was in escrow has been poured out, and the souls that have been saved have been received the promise of his coming. We've all received the promise of his coming. And I think what happens here is sometimes people will read the word, they'll hear about David's throne and how Christ is supposed to reign on it. They'll hear about prophecy that is yet to happen, and then they'll rule and say that it's not, that the story doesn't work because everything didn't happen. But what happened is the same thing as a transaction. The blood sat in escrow, and there was a little blood for you, there's a little blood for me, there's a little blood for my great-grandparents, and whomever else was saved. And as we died, a little blood was applied to us, made us white as snow. A little blood was applied to us, made us white as snow. The rapture happens, a lot of blood is applied to a lot of us, and it goes on and on and on and so forth. All right, I hope that made sense. Now, what I want you to see, he says, and it is said unto me, it is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water. Now, I want you to think back, and I think I might have mentioned this yesterday or last week, but I can't remember. I might have mentioned this, but if you go to Zechariah 12, there is a verse that says, and they looked upon him with whom they pierced. Now, upon me with whom they pierced. When we read that verse, if you were to read it in an interlinear Bible, there is two letters that hang there, which is abnormal because usually there's more English words than there are Hebrew words. Now, what we see here is he's the Alph and the Tauf. Now, when we read the Alph and Tauf, the Alph is the beginning of the Hebrew. The Tauf is the last of the Hebrew. In Greek, he would be Alpha, he would be Omega. When we read it in the Greek in this verse, we see Alpha, just the letter. We see Omega spelled out, okay? Why do we see it that way? Because he's closing the chapter, and so there's still some extra weight that has to take place. Now, why am I saying this? Why am I saying this? Because I want you to see we're in process here. We're in process here. We're coming to the closing of days. We're now in eternity. And as he's closing out business, just like I talked about our transaction here, as he's closing out business, he's still faithful to perform it. Why do I know that? Why do I know that? He's still faithful to perform it because he says, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give him unto him that is athirst of the fountain of water freely. And right before that, in that verse, he says, these are the words of him that are faithful and are true. All right, I hope I'm making sense. So, but what I'm saying here is he's in process, but he's calling the process to an end. We have reached the ending of a long period of about 7,000 years. Reaching the ending of a long period of about 7,000 years. And here we are, afresh, with the promise, not of his coming, but to walk with him, because he's already come. Now he also says in this verse, he says, I will give unto him the thirst of the fountain of water to live freely. Kind of reminiscent of the woman at the well, that thirstiness is no longer a factor because they'll drink of the water of life. Verse 7. And he that overcometh shall inherit all things. I will be his God, and he will be my son. Let me say that again. He that overcometh shall inherit all things. I will be his God, and he will be my son. God gives us an inheritance. And not only does he give us an inheritance, he gives us an inheritance that is beyond what we ever could have thought or imagined. Now unto him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that I could ever ask or think, according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. He says, I'm giving an inheritance, and those who overcome. Now, I want to pause you right here, because a lot of people think that overcoming is dependent on me and you. That overcoming is something that I've got to do, that I've got to save my own self. I've got to deliver myself from my sins. And so we get that overcoming theme that we had all throughout the first 7 letters to the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3. And a lot of us start thinking or believing that that as we sit in that place that we've got to do something. But I want to debunk that. Let's go over here, and I'm going to include this verse in here. But I want you to see this verse, and I think it's in Ephesians. But I'm going to confirm. I'm going to put this at the bottom in the notes. It says, "For whatsoever is born of God overcometh the world. That is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith. Who is he that overcometh the world? But he that believeth that Jesus is the Son of God." Overcoming is a faith thing. Overcoming is a faith thing. Overcoming is not a what can I do? How can I get myself out of this hole, this pit, this situation? Overcoming is a faith thing. Do you believe? I want you to think about it now. Think about it. Overcoming is a faith thing. It is a faith thing. Now, here's what I want you to see, because in the very next verse we see something that's interesting. So what did the verse say? It said, "He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." And then in verse 8, we see a big fat but. It says, "But the fearful." One more time. The fearful, the unbelieving, and unbelieving, and abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Now, most of this list is not surprising. Most of this list doesn't surprise us. We see it all the time. We saw it in Galatians. We saw it all throughout the New Testament, and probably in the Old Testament. We saw this as not a surprise. But the first thing on the list, the fearful will take their part in the lake of fire. The fearful. And I want to pause there, because I think a lot of us in the church have found ourselves wrapped up and scared and running in this season, this last year of our lives. We've been petrified. And take this from somebody who has their groceries delivered. We've been fearful and afraid. And I'm not saying this to say that I'm all big and bad. And I do some crazy things. I like to do some things that people like us don't always like to do. But I want you to see is that fear is a sin. Fear is a sin. Let's say it one more time. Fear is a sin. The fearful. Now, wow. I know that this verse says this, but let's think for a second. Go back to Exodus. The reason that they couldn't get it together and get into Canaan in 10 days, and it took them 40 years to get somewhere that would take 10 days, the reason they did that is because they were scared, afraid. They murmured and complained, and they were afraid. They wanted to go back. They were afraid. They had sent 12 spies over there. 10 came back with a good report, and they kept walking around in circles. They could have gone in there and taken the land because God told them it was theirs, but they were afraid. Hebrews 11. They were counted righteous not because of what they did, but because they believed God. They believed God, and in their belief of God, the proof positive of their belief in God was that they did what God said. They went where he told them to go. Abraham counted faithful. He got up and he left home. Abraham counted faithful. He took his son up on top of a mountain, the very thing that he had prayed for and asked God to give him. He took it on the mountain and was ready to sacrifice it because he believed God. Noah believed God that it was going to rain, and they had never seen rain before. Sounded crazy. Believed God. Believed God. They were not afraid. And see, I need us to distinguish that nervousness and fear are two different things. Fear will paralyze you so you won't move. Fright. Nervousness says, whoo, this is not going to be pretty, but I trust you. Job quoted it. He said it the best. He said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I'm not going to stop my belief in him because he took my stuff. Yet will I trust him. The fearful. Verse 9. And they came unto me, one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials full of the 7 plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Now. And it came unto me, one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, saying to me, Come hither, and I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of the heaven from God. Now, some people ask the question whether the bride is the city of the church, and really, we can dead that right there, that whether the city, we're talking about her abode or her place, is one and the same. Whether we're talking about the church itself or where the church is, it's all in the same. How do we know? We can go back to Revelation 17 and 18. When we get to Revelation 17 and 18, the woman was an institution, and it was a place. It was a city and a place. Okay? When we dealt with Revelation 12, it was a city and a place. It was a city and a people. It was an institution and a people. So we don't have to say that it's either or. It's probably both. It's probably both. But what we see now is the New Jerusalem, and the Old Jerusalem, of course, was in the the millennium. Verse 11, having the glory of God, her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone. Now, some people think that the jasper is referring to what we think of as a diamond, but I would suggest that it's probably not even a gem at all. It's probably referring to the light. There weren't words in the day that this was penned to describe different shades of light, and so the closest thing they could do is how the light passed through certain gems. And so we're about to get into this whole thing about all these different colors. And I think all these different gems, and I think it's really got a lot to do with colors. The colors, they're trying to describe how brilliant it is, how pretty it looked. Now, in Ezekiel 1:22, there's a similar word that would make us think that we're talking about a diamond. And ironically, although this may not be good, it is ironic to those of us who live in the United States, is that a diamond in a gold setting is normal. Especially, it's very fitting for a bride. Now, in Jewish culture, not necessarily, but to those of us who are reading the Bible, reading it in the United States, reading it over in Western culture, it seems quite normal, But I want you to think about this. I'm going to read it one more time. Having the glory of God. Her light was like a stone most precious, even like a jasper, clear as crystal. The verse started, says she had the glory of God. Having the glory of God, because she had the glory of God, her light was like a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Having the glory of God. Walking, talking, being in the presence of God made her radiant. Okay. Being in the presence of God made her glisten. Being in the presence of God, having the glory of God, having the Spirit of God, having His aura on me made me look like Him. And while that is wonderful, and we're talking about the New Jerusalem, we're talking about heaven, we're talking about the new heaven, the new earth, we're talking about all that stuff, I think that that's applicable to us today. That if we would get in the presence of God and talk less about other things and other people, if we would get in the presence of God, then we would look like Him. And having the glory of God, they became radiant. Having the glory of God. And that's why the Bible says that if you will lift Christ, he'll draw all men unto him. If we would get in his presence and stay in his presence, the doors of the church would be, they wouldn't be able to shut. We wouldn't have enough subscribers if we would get and stay in the presence of God. Verse 12. And had a wall great and high, and it had 12 gates. And at these gates 12 angels, names written thereon, which are the names of the tribe of Israel. Now this is not church talk, this is Israel talk. Now I don't want you to say, okay, so the bride is Israel, because in a minute we're going to see church talk. And that's where we would suggest that God ain't forgot about neither group. That he was given to both the Jews and the Gentiles, that the church and the Jews were saved. That he didn't make a promise that was void to anybody, that God was faithful and we could cohabitate and worship the same God in the same place. Now, I want you to also see this. And it had a great high wall, a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the 12 gates angels, and names written thereon, which were the names of the tribes of Israel. I want you to see this. There's no temple. We're talking about Israel. There's no temple. There was no need for a temple because God was tabernacled with men. God could walk freely around men. Now let's think about this. That makes good sense. Why does that make good sense? Because the tabernacle or the temple was necessary for men to commune with God because of their sinful, rank nature. Now that Satan is removed, there is no need for a temple. There's no need because God could move freely amongst men. What a time to live. What a time to live. Verse 13. And on the 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. Verse 14. And on the wall of the city there had 12 foundations. And in them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So here we just transferred. We went from talking about Israel type stuff. Now we're back to the church because here we're talking about the apostles. And we got the apostles. Now remember, the apostles are the foundation that God allowed to be laid. On this rock will I build my church. Talking about Peter. The apostles were the foundation that have allowed us to be able to know what we know and to study what we study. They wrote the Bible. They went and wrote the letters that made up the Bible. They are why we know of the great stories of Jesus Christ. And without them, we would not be who we are. Now, don't forget, Christ is yet the cornerstone. Christ is the cornerstone. He holds everything together, and without him, we would have no faith. We would have nothing. But he did leave in place some folks. And so in heaven, they are honored as such. They are honored as such. They are the foundations to the 12 walls. Now we'll ask the question. Make me ask the question. Who was the 12th? Since of the 12 apostles, we know it's not Judas. You remember they cast lots and they cast Matthias. But God seemed to have called Paul. They cast lots and they chose Matthias, but God chose Paul. So I would presume Paul would be the 12th. But we're going to have to get to heaven to see how that shook out. Verse 15. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. We've got an angel here, okay? Verse 16. And the city lieth 4 and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it were equal. Now, there are some people who think that the New Jerusalem is shaped like a cube and others that think it's shaped like a sphere. There are some that think it's shaped like a pyramid. I don't know. But this to me would suggest that it's either a sphere or a cube. But to me, that's not really relevant. Verse 17, And he measured the wall thereof in 144 cubits according to the measure of a man, that is, of angel. Now, a lot of people think that all this stuff, talking about the cubits and the size of it, that all of that is mystical stuff. Now, and while I believe that there are a lot of types in numbers and there are a lot of things that mean stuff, and the fact that we see so many 7s throughout the chapter of Revelation and we see so many 12s out throughout the book of Revelation, all of that stuff is wonderful. But I think that this is literal because this is a literal place that we will literally go, literally have access to, And so to me, I think this is literal. Now, I could be wrong, and we'll see when we get to heaven. Verse 18. And the building of the wall was of jasper, and the city was of pure gold unto clear glass. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, Peter writes about the manifold grace of God. Manifold means many, the various. And literally the version of manifold that is used would suggest many colors. What we're about to get into is a whole bunch of different gemstones and colors and stuff. But I want you to think about God in creation, because a lot of us are enamored by creation. I like to travel so much because I like to see how beautiful God made things, how pretty the clear blue, how it could be blue, but how the ocean could be clear and blue all together. How when you go down diving, it's dark, but with a light on your head, you can see the beautiful schools of fish. And how there are colors down there and people can't see them, but God, it took the time. Or how flowers don't have a whole lot of use or value, but that the bees would be able to commune with them and spread the pollen about. But God didn't make them pretty for the bees. The bees are colorblind. I believe God made beautiful things for his glory, for his pleasure, and for the pleasure of us, but chiefly for his pleasure. And so I want us to think in that vein that God is very much so an artist. And so although there's a lot of pretty things about earth, we in Auburn, when I was in school at Auburn, we would talk about how pretty the sunsets were. And we would make the joke and we would say, God must be an Auburn fan, because that pretty blues and oranges would seem to grace the skies at sunset time. But God is very much so an artist, but he's not limited or relegated to the beautiful things that he made here on earth. If God could do it, now I'm convinced that after all this time, that he could do something beyond what we could ask, think, or imagine, that it could be beyond our wildest imaginations, that it would be beautiful, it wouldn't be heinous, it would be pretty. And so when we think of this, he says, where am I? He says, the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. So this is not that wrinkly, cheap gold. This is highly refined gold. Highly refined, which makes sense because we see this idea of highly refined gold throughout the entire canon of Scripture, how there's gold highly refined in the fire. Highly refined gold. Not separated, not cheap, not false, but highly refined. It was like glass. It was so clear that you could see your reflection in it. So cool, so cool. Okay. Verse 19. And the foundations of the wall were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprasus, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. Now, there's a lot of research that would suggest to us that these things are tied to the Mazzaroth and the zodiac, and God was telling the story of creation in the wall. And if you want to hear about that, you can call me and I'll tell you all about it. I don't think it's relevant to our study, and so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole for the next 30 minutes, but there's a lot of talk about that. But I want you to see this idea of stones being used. There are 12 stones in the breastplate of the chief priest, and I think that is just probably in the likeness of what God is doing here. Verse 21. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. Here we go again. Now, what I want you to think here is, you remember I told you about the 12 stones that were in the chief priests. That's a Jewish idea. But here we go again with this pearly gates is not a kosher idea. It's not a Jewish-friendly idea. But yet again, here we are with God saying that the Gentile and the Jew were both saved, both in his likeness. Even when it came down to Paul and Peter, talking about, well, if you came up in the Jewish way, you keep that, but we're not going to make them make the Gentiles get circumcised. that we could coexist in our belief of Christ. Believing God was enough. But we see these pearly gates, and the 12 gates were of 12 pearls. Every several gate was one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, as it were, transparent gold. I want you to also think about this. 12 gates, one pearl out of each gate. That's a really big pearl. I don't know if I've ever seen a clam that big to make a pearl. Verse 22, and I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. The Lamb and God are the temple. They are the holy place. They are the holies of holies. That amount of access, we have access now. We have more access to God than anybody in any dimension of time. But can you imagine the access of being able to walk up to God, walk up to the Lamb, walk up to Christ and say, hey, I need some affection. How you doing? Thank you for saving me. Can you imagine to smell his fragrance? You know, I feel like David. When David said, one thing do I desire of the Lord, and that one thing will I seek after or will I look for, is that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Inquire of him in his temple and look upon him, look upon his beauty. There is no temple because God and the Lamb are the temple. Verse 23. And the city had no need of sun, neither of the moon to shine in it. For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. So there's no sun. Now also, I want you to go back and remember, we talked about Babylon. When we talked about Babylon, what we saw was that they began to worship the sun because it was the closest thing that they could worship. Well, God does away with that. He says, there's no reason for a sun. I'm here. I'm present. You don't need a sun. I didn't have to create day or night because I'm here. Come walk with me. Come talk with me. Come experience me. And dare I suggest to you today that although we're not sitting there at this moment, that if you would draw nearer to him, you'd start experiencing some of this in your walk, in your talk. Your salvation experience gives you some of that stuff in the spirit realm. You may not be able to see it. He says you don't need the sun. It's not important. Verse 24, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. And the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor to it. Now, it doesn't say they live there, but it lights the earth. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. No night. 26, and they shall bring the glory and honor to the nations into it. And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination, maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. So only our glorified bodies have access to it. Not our corrupted selves, not the things that make mistakes, that tell white lies, none of that. Only our glorified body have access to it. And so it leaves me with this question. Chapter 21 leaves me with this question. If God could have started here, why do it? Knowing that man was going to sin at the beginning of time, why do it? Knowing that man was going to fluff and flub and make mistakes, why do it? Why do it? Why do it? And I think we see a verse in Scripture that says that the ages to come, he might show the exceeding riches of his grace in his kindness toward us through Christ Jesus. For by grace we are saved through faith. That not yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. I think this entire life project, from Adam down to the ending of time, down to the consummation of time, was so that God could demonstrate an infinite display of love, so that he could show us just how much his grace was sufficient, how marvelous he was, because if we had only had his goodness, like the kids in the millennial reign who were deceived by him, we never get it. We never get it right. He wanted to demonstrate to us infinite never-ending, everlasting love. It's one thing to have everlasting life, but to have a concept of love. And I can go here, I can say to you, my Christian walk has made more sense to me when I came to understand what my sin cost. My Christian walk made more sense to me when I understood what the remission of sins was. And my Christian walk has made more sense to me when I've come to understand what love really looks like. Y'all, next week we'll conclude our study. And my hope, my prayer, my desire is that you have received something. But not that you've just received something, but that you've gotten out and you've been able to tell somebody about it. If this has been a blessing to you, my hope, my prayer, my desire is that you've been able to have some conversations with some people. And not gloom and doom about Revelation, but that there is a glorious promise to us that God has set up a place for us, and that those of us who know him and want to know him and have a desire for him have treasures and good things set up waiting for us. My hope, my desire, my prayer is that over the last 31 sessions, a little under a year, that you've grown, that you've come to know him deeper, and that not only have you held on to it, I think one of the biggest ills we do is we get all this knowledge and we don't tell nobody. We have this great experience and we sit quiet. That you would tell somebody about how good this promise is. There is a sweet promise here in this word. And if somebody would just grab hold of it and run this thing and tell somebody of it. Don't be like Sardis. Don't think that you're done because you got the information for yourself. Tell somebody, please. I will see you all next week for, I guess, our final installment of our Revelation study. You all be blessed. I love you. Goodbye. Good night.